The morning sun beat down on the courthouse steps as crowds shuffled toward security lines. A black woman in professional clothes adjusted her bag, her eyes calm but focused. Before she could step forward, a uniformed officer blocked her path. He leaned close, his voice dripping with contempt. "You people don't belong here. Animals like you should be in cages, not in courtrooms." The words hung heavy in the air. A few people turned their heads, some whispering, some pulling out their phones. She stayed silent, gripping her folder of documents tighter, but the officer wasn't finished. He smirked, stepped forward, and slapped the papers out of her hands. They scattered across the steps, tumbling into puddles, shoes stomping over them. He barked at her to pick them up. The crowd grew larger. Curious eyes locked onto the humiliation unfolding in broad daylight. She bent slowly to gather her files, but the officer shoved her shoulder hard enough to knock her to one knee. A burst of laughter came from two younger officers standing nearby. One lifted his phone to record, shaking his head as if this were entertainment. The officer sneered down at her. "Look at you, crawling where you belong." Her jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm. "These are legal documents. Please don't damage them." That only fueled his anger. He kicked a folder further down the stairs, smearing muddy footprints across stamped seals and case numbers. "Fraud," he spat. "Cheap fakes. Probably stolen, just like your ID." He yanked her purse off her shoulder, rifling through it carelessly, holding up her wallet like a trophy. The crowd gasped when he shoved her back again, this time pulling handcuffs from his belt. Cold steel closed around her wrists as the phones multiplied. Dozens of screens reflected the scene now. Some recorded in silence, others shouted protests. "That's not right," a young woman yelled from the edge of the crowd. But the officer barked back, "Keep moving, or you'll join her." The woman's knees stung. Her palms scraped raw from the concrete. Yet she held her head high, her expression unreadable. He hauled her up by the cuffs, parading her past the cameras like a trophy catch. "Trespassing," he declared loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "Caught her with fake government documents. She thought she could sneak into my courthouse." People muttered. Some nodded in approval, convinced by the uniform and badge. Others shook their heads in disbelief, their outrage simmering. The officer shoved her through the doors, laughing to his colleagues about the case closed they had just made. What nobody in that room knew was that this wasn't some powerless woman caught in a lie. The papers trampled into the mud weren't forgeries. The person standing in handcuffs wasn't a criminal at all. The stage had just been set for the cruelest mistake of this officer's life, one that the entire nation was about to witness. Inside the courthouse, the air was colder, but the humiliation burned even hotter. The officer marched her down the marble hallway as if she were a prize catch, his boots echoing with each step. "Clear a path," he shouted, puffing his chest, pulling her hard enough that the cuffs cut deeper into her wrists. A clerk carrying case files froze, eyes darting between the woman's bruised cheek and the officer's smug grin. But like everyone else, the clerk stepped aside in silence. Years of intimidation had taught them that speaking up could make them the next target. The woman was pushed into a chair at the defendant's table, wrists still bound, jaw set tight. Her hair was out of place from the shove, and a bruise was already blooming purple along her cheekbone. Yet she sat upright, eyes steady on the bronze nameplate mounted high above the judge's bench. The words, "The Honorable," gleamed back at her just 20 feet away, yet in this moment, she was treated like the lowest criminal in the room. The officer straightened his uniform, clearing his throat as though preparing for a performance. He had done this before. His voice carried with practiced ease. "Your Honor," he began, bowing his head respectfully to the stand-in judge presiding that morning, "I was conducting routine security when I intercepted a suspicious individual. She attempted to bypass courthouse security, refused identification, and grew hostile when questioned." The gallery nodded. They had heard this script many times, from many mouths. His words flowed like honey, painting himself as the professional, the protector, the one standing between order and chaos. He gestured toward the woman, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. She carried forged documents, dressed like she was impersonating court staff. When confronted, she resisted and became violent. "I used only the minimum force required." The substitute judge leaned forward, narrowing his eyes at the woman in chains. He saw not the bruise, not the handcuffs digging into her skin, but the badge and the uniform before him. And what injuries did she sustain? The officer's jaw tightened ever so slightly. Only what resulted from her own resistance, Your Honor. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, pressing play on a video that began conveniently halfway through the encounter. The screen showed the woman already in cuffs, shouting muffled protests drowned by his voiceover. See how erratic she is? See how unstable? He angled the phone for the courtroom to watch, pride flickering across his face. Behind him, two fellow officers smirked, backing up every word with nods of agreement. Yes, ma'am, one said to the prosecutor. Officer Martinez handled it with professionalism. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, adjusted her glasses, scanning her notes. The state recommends charges for trespassing, resisting arrest, and assaulting an officer. The woman sat in silence, lips pressed into a thin line, her body still but her mind racing. Around her, whispers filled the room. To everyone present, she was already guilty, already another statistic swallowed by a system that never believed people like her. But then, for the first time, she spoke. Her voice was calm, deliberate, carrying an authority that made the stenographer pause mid-stroke. Your Honor, she said, locking eyes with the bench, I will be addressing these allegations personally. The officer smirked, leaning back in his chair. To him, it sounded like desperation. To the rest of the room, it was just another powerless defendant trying to talk her way out. But in that moment, something shifted in the air. What no one yet understood was that every lie just spoken, every fabricated detail, every ounce of contempt dripping from the officer's tongue, was about to unravel in front of the entire courtroom. This was no ordinary defendant. This was the beginning of his downfall. The substitute judge leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk, already convinced of her guilt. Very well, he said with a sigh. You may speak, though I doubt it will change much. The woman rose slowly, the handcuffs rattling faintly as she straightened her posture. Despite the bruises, despite the chains, there was something unshakable in her stance. She glanced briefly at the prosecutor, then at the officers who had laughed at her, before letting her gaze rest firmly on the bench. First, Your Honor, she began, her tone calm but commanding. Let me correct a few factual inaccuracies. A ripple of surprise spread across the gallery. Defendants rarely spoke like this. Precise, measured, as if she had rehearsed in a courtroom many times before. Officer Martinez testified that I was trespassing. But, in reality, I was walking on a public sidewalk, approaching the main courthouse entrance during standard business hours. Her eyes flicked toward the stenographer. That sidewalk is a traditional public forum, protected under constitutional law. Citizens have every right to be there, including me. The stenographer hesitated for a moment, then resumed typing furiously, capturing every word. She continued, her voice steady. Second, the officer claimed I carried suspicious or forged documents. That is false. These are authentic court filings, memoranda, and schedules. They are not stolen nor counterfeit. She gestured toward the scattered folders on the evidence table. I had access to them in my official capacity. A sharp murmur ran through the crowd. Official capacity? People exchanged confused looks. The officer's smug expression faltered, just slightly. The substitute judge leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Official capacity? And what exactly is that supposed to mean? The woman paused, allowing the silence to stretch, the anticipation to build. Then she smiled faintly. I'll get to that in due time, Your Honor. The prosecutor scoffed, shaking her head. This is a waste of the court's time. She's clearly trying to stall, but the woman wasn't rattled. Her calmness was disarming. I'll also note that Officer Martinez testified his body camera malfunctioned. That's convenient. But I happen to know this courthouse has extensive security coverage. Multiple angles, multiple backups, and as of this morning, those recordings exist. Recordings that will prove his account false. The officer's face drained of color. His hand twitched against his thigh. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. The woman tilted her head, studying him like a chess player analyzing a losing opponent. Your Honor, I request an immediate preservation order for all surveillance footage between 8:45 and 9:15 this morning. every angle, every backup file, including the automatic uploads from his so-called malfunctioning body cam. The substitute judge blinked, taken aback. Defendants didn't speak this way. Defendants didn't cite constitutional protections or evidentiary rules with this kind of confidence. The gallery grew restless. Some leaned forward, whispering, "Who is she? How does she know this stuff?" Even the prosecutor faltered, caught off guard by the precision of her demands. "Objection," she snapped, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "The defendant can't just—" The woman turned to her with a look so sharp the prosecutor stopped mid-sentence. "Every defendant has the right to present evidence in their own defense. That right is guaranteed by the Constitution. You should know that." The silence was deafening. The officer shifted uncomfortably, his earlier arrogance crumbling with every word she spoke. And then, just as the tension peaked, she said the words that made the entire courtroom lean forward. "My name is Williams," she declared, her voice clear, her eyes unblinking. "And in a moment, you'll understand exactly why this officer just made the biggest mistake of his career." The prosecutor cleared her throat, desperate to wrestle control back. "Your Honor, this woman is clearly delusional. We don't even know her real name. She could be anyone." But the defendant's calm, razor-sharp voice cut through the air. "You'll find I'm not just anyone." She lifted her cuffed hands slightly, the chains clinking against each other. "I carry credentials that prove exactly who I am. Credentials this officer chose to ignore while slamming me against the wall of this very courthouse." The substitute judge frowned. He had presided over countless hearings, but something about this woman's tone unsettled him. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't begging. She was speaking as though she were still in control, even from the defendant's chair. "Credentials?" The prosecutor scoffed. "Another fantasy." The woman turned to the bailiff, who had been shifting uneasily in the corner. "Henderson," she said softly, locking eyes with him. "You've seen me here before, haven't you?" The bailiff froze. His mouth opened, then shut again. Recognition was dawning on his face, but fear held him silent. Martinez's head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing. "Don't you dare!" the woman continued, unshaken. "Go to my chambers, Henderson. Top drawer of the desk. Bring back the garment bag with my robes and the wooden box beside it. You know the one." The room stirred. Chambers, robes. Whispers rippled through the gallery like a rising tide. The substitute judge slammed his gavel. "Order in the court." But his voice carried less authority now. He too was beginning to wonder. Martinez leaned forward, trying to sneer, though his voice wavered. "She's bluffing. Just another scam artist, talking big. Don't listen to her." But sweat glistened on his forehead. The cracks in his confidence were showing. The woman slowly turned back toward him, her gaze icy, deliberate. "You thought I was powerless, officer. You thought your lies and your badge would bury me. But what you don't understand," she let the words hang in the silence, every eye on her, "is that I don't answer to you. I never did." A sharp intake of breath echoed from the gallery. Even the stenographer's fingers hovered in midair. The prosecutor tried again, her voice shrill now. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. She's manipulating the court, weaving some kind of fantasy to distract from the charges." The defendant tilted her chin, almost smiling. "Outrageous? The only outrageous thing here is that you all sat and nodded while an officer fabricated a story under oath, while he painted me as some criminal trespasser, while he called me an animal and a thief, and not one of you questioned it. Not one." The substitute judge shifted uncomfortably, his pen slipping from his fingers. The gallery grew restless again, some people whispering her name now, as if memory was finally catching up. Martinez clenched his fists. "This is a circus. She's nobody." Her eyes cut to him with deadly precision. "Then you won't mind when I prove exactly who I am." The bailiff swallowed hard, nodding almost imperceptibly, and slipped quietly out of the room. The gallery buzzed louder now, the anticipation of something monumental building by the second. For the first time that morning, Officer Martinez didn't look like the man in charge. He looked like the man about to be judged. The minutes ticked by like hours. Martinez tried to steady himself, straightening his uniform, but his hands betrayed him, trembling against the table. The substitute judge tapped his pen nervously, glancing toward the door where the bailiff had disappeared. The prosecutor shuffled her papers again and again, though she wasn't reading a word. Then the door creaked open. Henderson, the bailiff, stepped back inside carrying a long garment bag draped carefully over one arm and a polished wooden box tucked under the other. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. He walked slowly, deliberately, as though he were carrying sacred objects. He didn't speak. He simply crossed the room and set the items before the defendant. The woman rose, the clink of her handcuffs echoing in the silence. Henderson's hands shook as he reached for his keys. The prosecutor shot to her feet. "Objection. Absolutely not. You cannot." But her voice faltered as Henderson clicked open the cuffs. The chains fell away, clattering to the floor, the sound so loud it seemed to rattle the walls. The woman pulled open the garment bag. Black fabric shimmered under the fluorescent lights. Robes embroidered with gold trim. A hush fell over the room. Martinez froze, color draining from his face. "No," he whispered. The substitute judge half rose from his chair, confusion etched into every line of his face. What is this?" The woman didn't answer. She lifted the robes, slipped them over her shoulders, and straightened the folds with practiced ease. Then she opened the wooden box and removed a ceremonial gavel, its engraved handle gleaming like polished steel. She turned to Henderson. "Announce me properly." His throat worked, but when he spoke, his voice carried like thunder. "All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Kesha Williams presiding." The room exploded. Gasps, whispers, stunned silence. Some stood instinctively, others just stared in disbelief. Martinez staggered backward a step as though struck. "No, this isn't." "You can't." Judge Harrison, the substitute, shot to his feet, red-faced, suddenly realizing the colossal mistake he had made. "Your Honor, I didn't know, I swear, But Judge Williams barely glanced at him. Calmly, deliberately, she walked to the bench, climbed the steps, and took her rightful seat. She set the gavel down with a firm crack that silenced the chaos instantly. Her eyes swept the courtroom, landing on every officer, every clerk, every staff member who had smirked or nodded during Martinez's lies. Her voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the room. "Officer Martinez," she said, each syllable like a blade. "You told this court that people like me always claim to be someone important, that we play the victim card, that we need to learn our place." Martinez's lips moved, but no words came. He looked like a man watching the ground crumble beneath his feet. Judge Williams leaned forward slightly. "Well, officer, this morning you tried to teach me a lesson, but now it's time for me to teach you one, because today, in this courtroom, justice will learn your place." The gavel came down again, and the courtroom shook with the weight of the moment. The silence was suffocating. Martinez stood frozen, sweat trickling down his temple, his once smug face now pale and drawn. Judge Williams tapped the gavel once, the sound sharp and deliberate. "Officer Martinez, you testified earlier under oath. Do you recall your statement?" His lips trembled. Yes, Your Honor." "Then let me refresh your memory." She picked up the transcript that had been dutifully typed by the stenographer just an hour earlier. Her voice rang clear as she read his own words back to him. "These people always claim to be lawyers, judges, senators, anything to avoid accountability." She lowered the pages, her eyes never leaving him. "Does that sound familiar?" The courtroom buzzed, whispers rising like a storm. Martinez's shoulders sagged, but he forced a nod. She set the papers aside. "And you claimed I was trespassing, that I was carrying stolen legal documents, that I resisted arrest." "Correct." He swallowed hard. "Yes." "Your Honor." Her lips curled into something close to a smile, but it was cold, merciless. "Let's test the truth of that claim." She lifted a sleek tablet from the bench and tapped the screen. The lights dimmed as footage filled the monitors around the courtroom. The video, captured by courthouse security cameras, played in crystal clarity. There she was, walking calmly toward the courthouse steps. There was Martinez blocking her path, then striking her across the face, shoving her against the wall, snapping the cuffs around her wrists. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Martinez's own voice echoed through the speakers. "Another ghetto rat trying to sneak in. Filthy animals like you belong in cages." The sound landed like a hammer blow. People shifted uncomfortably, others shook their heads in disgust. "Officer Martinez," Judge Williams said, pausing the video at the exact moment of her assault. "Do you see me resisting in any way? Raising my hands? Threatening you." He stared at the floor, his mouth dry. "No, Your Honor. And yet you swore under oath that I was combative, that I assaulted you." Her voice grew colder. "That was perjury, officer. In this very courtroom." The prosecutor fumbled with her files, her face flushed red. She opened her mouth to object but found no words. Judge Williams swiped again, and the backup feed from Martinez's own body cam flickered onto the screen. His voice, dripping with contempt, filled the room. "Look at this uppity one thinking she can just walk into my courthouse. Time to teach her a lesson." The gallery erupted, some gasping, some whispering angrily. Judge Williams turned her piercing gaze back to the trembling officer. "You claimed your body cam malfunctioned. In reality, the footage proves otherwise. Not only did you assault me without provocation, you attempted to erase the evidence of your crime. That is obstruction of justice." The weight of her words pressed down on him like a physical force. His hands shook uncontrollably, gripping the table for support. "Officer Martinez," she said, her voice steady and final. "You told this court that I needed to learn my place. But tell me, who do you think is out of place now?" The gavel struck again, and Martinez flinched like a condemned man hearing his sentence. The courtroom sat in stunned silence, every eye fixed on the bench. Judge Williams lifted a thick manila folder and laid it gently on the desk before her. Its edges were worn, the weight of years pressing down on its contents. "Officer Martinez," she began, her tone calm, almost surgical. "You've spent the last hour convincing this court that I was just another nameless defendant. But you forgot one crucial fact. For 23 years I've presided over this courthouse, which means I've seen your face before, many times." Martinez's head jerked up, his lips parted, but no words came. She opened the folder, flipping through page after page. Internal affairs reports, use of force complaints, witness statements. 47 formal complaints against you in 15 years. 47, she emphasized the number like a hammer striking an anvil. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Pulled out a sheet and held it high. Complaint number 12. A 17-year-old honor student accused you of planting narcotics in his backpack after he refused to provide information about his brother. The department deemed the allegation unsubstantiated. Yet here we are, listening to you spin the same language, resisting, acting erratically, threatening officer safety. The same script, over and over again. Martinez's breathing grew shallow. His knees threatened to buckle. She placed the document down and raised another. Complaint number 23. A cardiologist, arrested outside his own home because you didn't believe a black man could afford to live in that neighborhood. 6 hours in jail before he was released without charge. Once again, your department closed the case. Unsubstantiated. She snapped the folder shut with a crack that echoed through the chamber. "Do you see the pattern, officer? Or shall I continue?" He shook his head weakly, but his silence was damning. The judge rose slightly from her chair, her robes sweeping around her like armor. "I've also cross-referenced your arrest records. Out of more than 1,000 arrests, 87% involved people of color, despite the community being less than half minority. In 63% of those cases, you used force. Against white defendants, just 12%. Care to explain that disparity?" Martinez's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, but no defense came. She let the numbers linger in the air, each statistic another nail in the coffin. Over 400 of your arrests were dismissed due to lack of evidence or violations of constitutional rights. That's not law enforcement, officer. That's systemic abuse. The gallery stirred, reporters scribbling furiously, clerks whispering to one another, officers shifting uneasily in their seats. Judge Williams' eyes narrowed. And perhaps the most damning of all, your actions have cost this county over $2 million in settlements. Money that came from taxpayers. Money that should have gone to schools, hospitals, community safety. Instead, spent cleaning up your messes. She leaned forward, her gaze locking onto him like a predator stalking its prey. "Tell me, Officer Martinez, was it worth it? Every lie, every bruise, every life you destroyed. Was it worth standing here today, stripped of the very power you abused?" Martinez's chest heaved. His once proud uniform now looked like a costume on a broken man. Judge Williams raised the gavel slightly, her voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. "Because tomorrow, you won't be wearing that badge. Tomorrow, you'll be the defendant. And the same system you tried to manipulate will finally turn on you." The gavel struck, and the echo carried the weight of years of injustice crashing down all at once. The air in the courtroom was electric, charged with tension so thick it felt like a storm about to break. Martinez sat hunched in the defendant's chair, his once polished uniform clinging to him like a shroud. Every whisper, every scribble of a reporter's pen, every shifting body in the gallery reminded him that his world was collapsing in real time. Judge Williams rose from the bench, her robes flowing like a wave of authority, her gavel gripped tight in her hand. She didn't need to shout. Her voice cut through the silence with a clarity that demanded attention. "Officer Martinez," she said, every syllable deliberate, "you spent this morning calling me a criminal, a thief, an animal. You told me to know my place. You thought your badge made you untouchable." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But today, the truth stripped away that badge. And now we see you for what you are, a man who has hidden behind power for too long, a man whose lies have destroyed lives, a man who will finally face consequences." Martinez's eyes darted wildly, as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. His hands shook so violently his lawyer reached out instinctively, but even he seemed too afraid to touch him. Judge Williams slammed the gavel once. The crack echoed like thunder. "You are guilty of assault, guilty of perjury, guilty of deprivation of civil rights under color of law. And for every grandmother you shoved, every teenager you framed, every man you humiliated, you will answer." The gallery erupted in gasps. Martinez's knees buckled and he slumped forward, his face buried in his trembling hands. 25 years, Judge Williams declared, her voice booming. 25 years in federal prison, without parole. The words hit like a bomb. The courtroom exploded with noise, gasps, shouts, and a rising wave of applause that shook the walls. Martinez collapsed fully into his chair, sobbing, his career, his reputation, his freedom shattered in a single sentence. The very walls of the courthouse seemed to press in on him, the weight of every life he'd ruined now crashing back onto his own. Judge Williams raised her chin, addressing not just the courtroom but the invisible audience beyond its walls. Let this be a message. To every officer who abuses their power, to every prosecutor who looks the other way, to every system that protects corruption, justice may take its time, but it never forgets. She lifted the gavel high, her voice ringing with finality, and when justice arrives, it strikes harder than you can imagine. The gavel came down one last time, the sound like a lightning strike splitting the air. The gallery erupted into thunderous applause, people rising to their feet. Some wept openly, others shouted, "Justice! Justice!" Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, their cameras flashing like fireworks in a night sky. And as Martinez was dragged from the courtroom, shackled at last, Judge Williams sat back on her bench, calm, unshaken, the living embodiment of justice itself. If this story shook you, if you believe justice must always prevail no matter how powerful the abuser may seem, then don't just watch, take action. Hit that like button to make sure this story spreads. Subscribe right now, because every day we uncover the hidden battles, the untold injustices, and the powerful moments where truth finally wins. Your story could be next. Justice delayed is justice denied. So let's keep fighting together.